All right, so welcome back. So last week we kind of opened up the discussion on prophecy, and we looked at quite a few things. Anyone remember what we talked about last week?
70 weeks.
All right, very good. Usually there's just death, silence, a lot of eye avoidance, but that's great. That's wonderful. Yes, we talked about the 70 weeks of Daniel. That was kind of the primary passage for what we covered last week. I hope that you went back and read that passage and were encouraged by it. This week we're going to be primarily in Matthew chapter 24. If you have your Bibles, you can open to Matthew 24. We're going to have it on the screen, and we'll read it together, but that's where we're going to be primarily tonight. So we're back here in our biblical prophecy series. This is a verse coming out of the prophet Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 42:9. Let's read this verse together. Everything I prophesied has come true, and now I will prophesy again. I will tell you the future before it happens. All right, and as we have talked about multiple times already, this is God speaking to mankind, saying, hey, I know it. I'm going to tell you what happens. I'm going to prove myself, right? I'm going to prove my word. You can trust everything I say because I'm going to prophesy the future and you'll watch it happen. All right? Beautiful verse of prophecy. If you haven't read it, it's a wonderful one to hang up, right? You can put this on your refrigerator, try to tell this to your kids that you know this, but realize this is not really for you and your kids. This is for God. And so there are some parents who try to use this kind of philosophy on their children. It usually doesn't go well. So tonight we're going to focus on, again we have 8 weeks in this class. We're going to be only able to focus narrowly on kind of one topic each of these 8 weeks. So tonight we're going to talk about birth pangs in prophecy. Now, what is the first thing you think of when you hear the two words birth pangs?
Children being born.
Screaming? Children being born? Right? Pain? All right. Well, let's just see this. The uterus is a muscular organ that contracts powerfully to squeeze your baby out. And those contractions are the primary source of labor pain. Besides intense muscle tightening throughout your abdomen, now most of you men in the room, you can just read.
No
you
clue.
look at the reactions of the women in the room. Right? Besides intense muscle tightening throughout your abdomen, and sometimes your entire torso and pelvic area, you may feel pressure on your back, perineum, bladder, and bowels. All that combines to ratchet up pain, says J. O'Brien, the male.
Yeah.
The male person was born for this. Right? Really, what it comes down to, you can quantify it in a verbal or in a photographic image, because pictures speak 1,000 words, right? And so this. When we talk about birth pangs, all right, don't you like them? Yeah. She went to work then for the Chicago Bears, right? When you think of birth pangs, all right, is this something exciting? You know, is it an exciting time? You look forward to birth pangs? No. What do you look forward to?
Does.
What do you look forward to?
I just say thank you, Lord.
The birth. You look forward to the end result of the birth pangs, not the birth pangs themselves. Do you think Jesus was intentional when he uses this imagery, this verbal imagery?
Yes.
By the way, who created male and female?
God.
Who created the idea that there would be intercourse and then birth as a result? That's God, right? God's method by which babies would be born, this is the method which he chose, right? So he knows intimately the language with which he uses. Jesus didn't parse words, he used them intentionally. Every word that he said is critically important. So when he's talking about prophecy, right, specifically we're studying Matthew 24 today. When we talk about prophecy and he uses this imagery, he's using it intentionally. All right, and anyone who has had a baby or anyone who has seen the result of a birth, you understand the process and then the wonderful end result. So tonight we are going to focus on a little bit of the negative. We're going to talk about 8 types of birth pangs that Jesus predicts in Scripture. But remember, that's not the focus. While that will be the focus of our class tonight, the focus is not on the birth pangs themselves. What's the focus on? The end result, which is what? The second coming of Jesus Christ. Right? The fact that Jesus Christ will return to this earth, which is exactly what he said he was going to do. Right? And we talked last week about the prophetic scriptures. All the prophetic scriptures prophesying his first coming came true exactly, right, to the jot and tittle. So if we know we can trust the scripture and he says he's coming again, we know we can absolutely trust those as well. All right, let's continue to move on. Matthew 24. As he sat on the Mount of Olives. Who is he? Context. This is Jesus. As Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives. By the way, where is the Mount of Olives? Israel. Where more specifically? What city? Jerusalem, capital city. We talked a lot about Jerusalem last week. Where is the Mount of Olives with respect to Jerusalem?
Isn't it across from Kidron Valley?
That's exactly right. So you have the city of Jerusalem, the walled city, the old city, where the Temple Mount is, right? And then there's a valley, the Kidron Valley, right? And then the next mountain over is the Mount of Olives, right? So Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, which means, exactly right, Dwayne, they have eyesight to the Temple Mount, right? The beautiful temple at the time, which was called Herod's Temple, right? All the renovations, beautiful structure. He's on the Mount of Olives. The disciples come to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming until the end of the age? And Jesus answers them. And he says, see that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end isn't yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are what? The beginning of birth pangs. All right? So those of you who have experienced labor, right? The beginning of birth pangs, not too bad at the beginning, right? But then what happens?
Can I ask a question, Reverend?
Yes, you certainly may.
You're saying the pangs.
Yes.
And I always thought it was pain.
You can use them interchangeably.
So are they the same word?
I don't know in the Greek if it's the same word. We can look at the word study.
Okay.
For the purpose of English, we can interchange the words.
So, okay.
Pangs, birth pangs, birth pangs.
Because I always thought it was pain and everybody say pangs.
What is indicative of birth pangs as you go through them?
They increase in intensity and they grow shorter.
All right. Intensity and frequency, right?
Yeah.
All right. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation. We talked about this last week. Why do we call Daniel's 70th week the week of tribulation? Because the Bible does.
Yeah.
That's why we call it. We don't make up the words. We're just using biblical words. They'll put you to death. You'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake, and then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So there's a lot that has to happen before the end will come. All right? This is Jesus specifically talking. Now, in this passage, he's going to list 8 categories of birth pangs. All right? False messiahs, wars and rumors of wars, ethnic strife, kingdom against kingdom, famine, earthquakes, lawlessness, the spread of the gospel, and love gone cold. We're going to take a few minutes tonight and we're going to look at each of these 8 categories of birth pangs that Jesus talks about. We're going to have some slides, we're going to have some videos. All of this, by the way, will be available online when we put the video up, and all of the documentation and bibliography for each of our sessions is at the end of the PowerPoints, and you're welcome to see those online, or we can email you the PowerPoints as well. Every slide that we use from a periodical and a video that we use is all referenced. So you realize it's not all stuff we made up, it's all coming from sources that are readily available, most of which I found online. So let's talk about discerning the times. What does this phrase mean, just to discern the times?
To recognize it.
Yeah, to recognize it, to be aware, right? To examine the times, right? That discernment is not something to simple. It's not a simple one-time thing to look at. It's not like glancing the times, right? There's a reason we use the word discernment. There is intentionality involved behind this word. There is study and exam and focus and time commitment made. All right, the Bible will tell us to discern the times. In the last 70 years, why would I use the last 70 years as a time frame? That's exactly right. It's the entire reason we started last week with the prophetic sign of the return of Israel. All right, in the last 70 years, around the same time Israel returns as a nation, the signs that Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 24, all of them are increasing in intensity, every one of them, increasing in frequency, and they are converging. What we are seeing now in the last 70 years, we're not only seeing the signs, which, by the way, those signs have been existent since time began, right? Since the fall, right? All of them have. Right? But what we are seeing now is a convergence of all these signs. And that is the major impetus that we're going to see for the birth pang session tonight. Let's start with the first one that Jesus mentioned, false messiahs. Who is this? All right, remember this guy? You guys remember him? All right, 1978. All right, he is a Messiah-like figure. Did it end well?
Do not drink the Kool-Aid.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid. You know where that phrase come from? Right, here you go. All right, Jim Jones, 1978. Yes.
The ambulance company that I was in the Army went to go clean that up.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would have been
That was before my time. But
probably
still,
some
that was-
PTSD for those guys.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. How long ago was this? Nice, very good.
Oh,
All right. Now, Chris Henderson is not here tonight to read the screen for us. But thank you very much for taking his
I'll
place.
take his place.
He's traveling. Right. The fact would be, thank you. There's a little mathematics involved in tonight's lesson, all right? Not very long ago is the point, right? 1993.
Oh, Waco. Yeah.
All right. And this guy who was a messianic figure quoted scripture like crazy, quoted prophetic scripture like crazy. If you listen to anything he said, he was a little bit whacked. But didn't end well here, did it either? No. 1997. A little closer. This is not that long ago, all right? This is right out of the Orlando paper. All of these things you'll find sourced. Again, this cult, Heaven's Gate. All right, I don't know if you heard about that cult, but didn't end well for most of them either.
Stay away from the Nikes.
Yeah. 2007, just a few years ago, this is a small cult back in Russia, and they were waiting for the Messiah, and anyway, it didn't work out well for them. They had to get rescued out of the cave. Guess he didn't come. All right. You guys know this guy?
Yeah.
All right. Mormons, right? Or Jeffs, right? This is Warren Jeffs, 2011. You can read about him. So just a couple examples. We'll go back to his slide. How long ago was it?
Well, it says 0.11 years.
10 years. Just a few years ago, right? So what we're going to see is an increase in this type of behavior. Ultimately, and we're not going to talk about this guy tonight, but ultimately there will come a false Messiah to this world, a false prophet that will lead many astray. What do we know his name as, or his title as? Yeah, the Antichrist. The book of Revelation will call him the beast, right? So we will talk about him in greater length in one of our future sessions. But you see these people who are able to sway minds, right? False prophets. Let's talk briefly about wars and rumors of wars. Now, the first two wars that I have listed on this slide are World War I and World War II. Right? Those are a while back. Right? One of our last World War II veterans just passed away not too long ago. We did service over at the VA. But let's just look at the last 18 years. That's not long, right? Some of us have kids that are that old or maybe younger than that. Just in the last 18 years. Let's just take a look. Darfur, Sudan. Sound familiar? The Iraq War. All right, and now let's keep going. Pakistan, the Central African Republic, where we have missionaries who serve. The Iran-PJAC conflict. Niger Delta, the Houthis in Yemen, Kivu in Congo. By the way, if there's a dash and no ending,
Still ongoing.
that's an ongoing conflict. Paraguay, the Chad Civil War, that's in Africa. Oh, that's just the second slide here, by the way. 2005, we made it 2 years. Bangladesh, India, Mount Elgin, Fatah Hamas, Bakassi conflict, Lebanon-Israel war in 2006. Operation Astute, the Elayam War, the Iraqi Civil War, the Mexican Drug War, the war in Somalia. Made a movie about that war.
Black Hawk Down.
Yep. Operation Enduring Freedom, Trans-Sahara. Hamas's takeover of Gaza, 2007. The Lebanon conflict in 2007, Tuareg Rebellion, the war in Gishutia, the invasion of Anjouan, the conflict in Lebanon in 2008, Bangladesh, India, Kufra and Libya, Cambodia-Thai border, Djibouti and Eritrean border, the Russo-Georgian war, the Gaza war. By the way, how far are we now? We're in 2008. We're 5 years. The Sudanese nomadic conflicts, insurgency in the North Caucasus, Boko Haram insurgency, that's Africa, Peruvian political crisis, South Yemen insurgency, the Somali Civil War, Operation Scorched Earth, the Dongo conflict, South Kyrgyzstan ethnic clashes, Kingston unrest, Tajikistan insurgency, Second Ivorian Civil War, Libyan Civil War. So we're back. So Dongo conflict, so if we continue to look through this, look at the years as we march forward to 2009, 2010, 11, 12. We come up here to 17 at least. We're getting some closer where we are. South Sudan, by the way, we're talking about that later in today's presentation. All right, we have Libya, Iraq, Mali, Hagley, Arabia, back in Yemen, Aragoli, Central African Republic again, South Sudan, Fatwas, I mean, just everywhere. You see conflict all over the globe. Israel and Gaza. You're going to see Israel in this list multiple times, right? Iraqi Civil War, again, the Russo-Ukrainian War, that continues to heat up that border, right? The Yemeni Civil War, Kurdish-Turkish conflict, Armenian-Azerbaijani, and now we're here up in 2016 in Uganda, and we're not done yet. So you understand the point? By the way, this comes off of Wikipedia, all the current clashes that have been assembled there by people who put all this together. So I didn't do this research, I'm just simply presenting it for you. The Persian Gulf crisis in 2009, Israel and Gaza, again, clashes in 2019. And here's the final last slide about wars and rumors of war. Just one after the other, after the other, after the other. It just never ends. And when will this stuff end, by the way?
It won't.
At the second coming, I believe.
It'll end when Jesus comes back, right? And we have the War of Armageddon. We'll talk about that in a future session. But mankind on its own are just unredeemable without Christ, right? Fighting over land, fighting over resources, fighting over power, fighting over whatever. You know, we find a reason to fight. Wars and rumors of wars. I'd say, was Jesus accurate? Yeah, Jesus was accurate. And how many years is this? This is just from when we start. Yeah. Just 18 years. All right. So you get the idea. We don't need to worry about that. God is pretty clear. He's checked that box. Jesus was right on that one. Let's talk a little about ethnic strife. Ethnic strife. And I have a video here for you on this one.
Iran have released a terrifying video depicting the destruction of the U.S. Capitol and the takeover of Israel in a provocative propaganda stunt. The chilling footage shows the U.S. Capitol exploding in a fireball as a missile launched by Iran strikes the heart of the American government. The footage is accompanied by pro-government music and features clips of Iran's Revolutionary Guard marching in front of Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The video also shows Iran liberating Jerusalem in a blow to Israel, Iran's fiercest enemy in the region. The video starts by showing marching Revolutionary Guards while the next shot depicts a missile being launched. Moments later, U.S. Capitol is engulfed in a fiery inferno. According to Kasra Arabi, an analyst at the Tony Blair Institute, the music playing in the background of the video is a nationalistic song and is used as propaganda in Iran. The lyrics to the song describe the capital as a palace of oppression which was destroyed by the Alavi, Imam Ali's, IRGC, and the good news of the liberation of Quds, Jerusalem, arrives from Iran. Responding to the shocking footage, U.S. Senator Pat Toomey issued a stark warning. The senator said, last week, Iran's chief diplomat allegedly admitted the IRGC calls the shots in Tehran. Now, Iran releases a fake video of the IRGC blowing up our capital. The Biden admin's priority should be ensuring Iran cannot carry out such an attack, not capitulating by removing sanctions. After the video was broadcast, Iran's supreme leader on Sunday criticized the country's foreign minister, who reportedly said in a leaked interview that the elite Revolutionary Guards had more influence in foreign affairs and Tehran's nuclear dossier than he did.
So here you hear of a conflict between Iran and Israel and the United States. And the Iranians talking about using potential use of nuclear weapons. All right. Now I have another video for you. Let's watch this one together.
Palestinian terror groups from the Gaza Strip, about 2 miles behind me, have fired around 2,000 rockets into southern and central Israel. But it's becoming clear Israel is not just fighting these Palestinian groups, but the one who funds, arms, and supports them, the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is a Palestinian Islamic Jihad official boasting of its relationship with Iran.
The Mujahideen in Gaza and in Lebanon use Iranian weapons to strike the Zionists. We buy our weapons with Iranian money. An important part of our activity is under the supervision of Iranian experts. I'm not sorry. I'm proud to say that the rockets that are used to bomb Tel Aviv have an Iranian signature on them, the signature of Qasem Soleimani.
With Iran's support for the terrorists, more than 1 million Israelis are living under the threat of rockets falling at any moment. The massive rocket fire from Gaza began on May 10th. On Monday afternoon, sirens wailed in the city of Jerusalem for the first time since 2014. These Israelis had gathered on Jerusalem Day to march into the city, celebrating the reunification of Jerusalem in 1967. Police also evacuated the Western Wall during the sirens. Several rockets did hit communities on the outskirts of Jerusalem, damaging homes. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Hamas and other Islamic groups.
This evening on Jerusalem Day, the terrorist organizations in Gaza have crossed the red line and attacked us with missiles in the outskirts of Jerusalem. Israel will respond with great force. We will not tolerate attacks on our territory or our capital, on our citizens or our soldiers.
Later in the week, the rocket barrages increased substantially. In the heaviest fighting since 2014, Hamas and other terror groups fired more than 1,000 rockets within a day and a half. It's the largest ever rocket fire on South and Central Israel. The rocket salvos and the interceptions by the Iron Dome anti-missile system lit up the night sky over Tel Aviv in what looked like a Star Wars battle. Israel suspended flights from David Ben-Gurion Airport for an hour when rocket fire hit nearby. During the day, the skies over southern Israel witnessed the aerial battle between the rockets and the Iron Dome.
All of these rockets were fired from densely populated civilian areas in Gaza by terrorists, blatantly disregarding human life and security of Palestinians and aiming to kill Israeli civilians. We are responding to Hamas's aggression by firing rockets at Israel, at our capital, and by forcing more than 1.5 million Israeli civilians into shelter.
Inside Gaza, Hamas vowed to keep fighting, and its leader, Ismail Haniyeh, said it shifted the balance of power. While Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile system has shot down more than 90% of those rockets, a number have hit Israeli communities like Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Petah Tikva, killing 7 Israelis, including a 6-year-old boy. Israel responding with hundreds of surgical strikes in Gaza to stop the deadly barrages. Many of Hamas's rockets are supplied by Iran, leading 44 Republican senators to call on President Biden to suspend its nuclear talks with the Islamic regime. President Biden spoke at length with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and affirmed Israel's right to defend itself. Israel then found itself fighting an internal conflict. Israel is also seeing the worst Jewish-Arab violence in at least 20 years. Arabs have rioted in several Israeli towns, and Jews have attacked Arabs, in one instance, on live TV. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the violence on both sides.
Government troops in Afghanistan are losing ground to the Taliban. The insurgents are stepping up pressure on the Afghan army as American forces withdraw. The U.S. military's top general said yesterday, quote, "We have to see how this plays out." Charlie Daggett is in Kabul, Afghanistan's capital. Charlie, how is it playing out so far?
Well, Anthony, it's not playing out very well. It's less than a week since the official U.S. drawdown got underway, and the Taliban is on the march, capturing even more territory north of Kabul overnight. Afghan forces fell back to safer fighting positions in Baghlan in what they called a tactical retreat. To the Taliban, seen here with the captured Army Humvee, it's another victory. U.S. airstrikes have been called in to help struggling Afghan troops. With the Taliban on the warpath, the man in charge of peace talks, Abdullah, told us they barely negotiated in 9 months.
Worst case scenario, God forbid, will be a complete all-out war.
The grim prospect of a civil war is something Ahmed Massoud and his followers are preparing for.
I fight for it, and I'm ready to give my life for it.
His father gave his life for it, Ahmed Shah Massoud, who led the resistance against the Taliban in the 1990s. He was assassinated just 2 days before 9/11. The Taliban knew the U.S. would retaliate with everything at its disposal. Massoud would be too dangerous an ally. Should the Afghan military collapse, his son says he and others stand ready to take up arms in what some are already calling Resistance 2.0.
It sounds like you're describing a militancy.
Well, it will not. It will be people ready to fight. It will be an organized resistance against the Taliban.
If it should come to that.
If it comes to that.
Like most people in Afghanistan, he's hoping it does not come to that. He would rather the fragmented government unify and find some sort of peaceful solution.
We were ready to forgive the Taliban and to move on.
Forgive the Taliban?
Yes, absolutely. And they killed my father. Al-Qaeda killed my father.
You're willing to forgive, but...
stop it there. I'm not sure. I thought we'd finish that interview, but maybe not. Go back and watch it if you want to read it. But look, you're seeing ethnic strife. That's civil war. You see what's going on in Israel. We will continue to focus on Israel throughout the rest of our 8 weeks because we know how important its importance in prophecy. So let's talk briefly about famine. What's going on with respect to famine? You've seen the droughts pretty much all over the world right now, although it doesn't feel like it today here, right? But we had a whole month of no rain here. This is from, you'll see news articles, this is from CNN. The coronavirus pandemic will cause global famines of biblical proportions, the UN warns. Anyone find anything ironic here?
Yeah. They use CNN using the term biblical?
Yeah, CNN, exactly right. That's what I find ironical. Or in the UN, they don't acknowledge God's existence unless it fits their purposes. Yeah.
The interesting thing about famine is everybody thinks because of lack of food. That's not the truth. The truth is distribution. We produce, between the United States and Europe, we produce more than adequate food to feed everybody in the world. It's about distribution. Countries use food to control their populations.
You want to say something?
No, I just finished.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. This, by the way, April 22nd, 2020. This is much more current. This is April of this year. Kim Jong-un raising fears of food shortages in North Korea. This is from southern Madagascar. This is from May 13th, so just a couple weeks ago. At risk of famine, it's worst drought in 40 years there, which is off the coast of Africa. Here's a video.
Bido Malibe is due to give birth in just a few weeks' time. But every day, she still walks up to 10 kilometers in seating temperatures to search for water.
The water problem here is really affecting everything. We spend all our days looking for water. One can't do any business to earn any income.
Finding water in this part of Ghana has always been difficult. People rely on rivers and lakes or boreholes. But with little rain now for months, it's even more of a challenge.
The farther you go, the more desperate the situation. These people have been digging for hours in the dry riverbed just to find enough water to fill a bucket to take home. In the midday sun, temperatures are around 40 degrees Celsius.
There's not just families feeling the effects. For farmers like Alhassan Husseini, it's a catastrophe. 11 out of his cows have died from thirst in recent weeks.
No grass, no water, and they're dying. One is lucky to make a few dollars if a cow is about to die, and a butcher is close by to slaughter it instantly. If the rains delay further, it will be a disaster.
They've watched the water rising for months. Lake Tanganyika, harnessed by so many in landlocked Burundi as a source of life and livelihoods, but grown wild and beyond their control now, the lake's turned against its people, reaching hundreds of meters inland, pushing them out.
When we woke up, the house was already starting to collapse. We couldn't salvage anything.
Tens of thousands of people down the western side of the country have evacuated, their homes and food stocks destroyed, without any way to earn a living. Others have stayed put, defiant in submerged houses, children learning as waves lap at the school door. All this despite the real risk of disease or worse.
Each time the children try to get to the rest of the house to see what they can save, the crocodiles chase them away. Crocodiles are hunting everywhere in these waters.
Like the water, aid agencies are rushing in. The task is monumental. Burundi is one of the most densely populated and poorest countries in Africa. The amount of usable land and resources is low. Only 15% of its humanitarian funding has been met for 2021. There's just 1 month worth of emergency stocks in the cupboard.
Short term, what worries me the worst is the fact that all the statistics and the experts are saying that the rains will continue, which means a greater number of people in need of emergency assistance. And most critical of that emergency assistance is access to shelter. It is safe drinking water. It is better hygiene and sanitation services.
And while tides may change, this situation will not. Experts blame climate change for new, more damaging rainy seasons. Much of Burundi's coastline will have to be permanently abandoned. Here, one of the world's most vulnerable populations is already shouldering the burden of its new normal.
Climate change could pose to be a big problem for Pennsylvania in the next few decades. The Wolf administration released results of a climate impact assessment, and it shows Pennsylvania's average temperature will be nearly 6 degrees higher by 2050. It also foresees more days with temperatures above 90.
Pennsylvanians' health will be at catastrophic risk from heat waves, which are the #1 cause of weather-related fatalities in the United States. This has major implications for the many Pennsylvanians who work outside.
The report also predicts precipitation will increase with more heavy rain events, and that could cause more flooding throughout the state.
Now explain to me.
He's never been to Florida.
Explain to me how climate change is making it drier in one part of Africa, climate change is making it flood in another part of Africa, and climate change is increasing temperatures yet increasing rain in Pennsylvania.
Well, you just need to wait till the last couple slides. We're coming to that. We're going to come and answer that exact thing. There's specifically intention for the different videos that we've included tonight, all right? Because you're seeing what's happening around the world, and you're seeing the world try their best to understand and explain it. Right?
Or actually to profit from it.
Oh well,
It gives money to make Big Angry Bull in the sky less hot.
Yes, that is another motive. But to their best, and you saw, by the way, did you see the different news outlets reporting? I didn't just pick U.S. news outlets. You saw Al Jazeera. We picked places, news outlets from all around the world, as we pick coverage for us to look at tonight. So we've covered the first 4, all right? But there's 4 others. Let's take a look at these. Earthquakes, lawlessness, the spread of the gospel. We have one good one, right? And then love gone cold. Let's just look at this. Let's talk about earthquakes for a minute.
Arguably, one of the most commonly discussed natural signs in the end days is the dramatic increase of earthquakes around the world, something that in geological time would be statistically unprecedented if it were actually happening during what many believe is the last generation.
That in the last days there'd be an increase in great earthquakes. Jesus used verbiage that means bigger earthquakes in unusual places. We're looking at things regarding, for example, greater hurricanes, greater typhoons, things that in nature you can sense that things are coming undone. And yet, if you looked at it naturally, you would say, well, this is due to global warming, or this is due to man's bad stewardship of the earth. But yet the Bible said as we approached the end, this is exactly what we would see, which, by the way, that preempts man's involvement.
The scriptures do tell us that earthquakes, specifically earthquakes, will increase in frequency and in intensity.
But wait a minute. Hasn't the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS, gone on record to state that this is not occurring, that no such increase in earthquakes have been detected around the world?
Because this is such a debated topic, the USGS gave a press release saying that this was not occurring. As a result, we actually decided to take the USGS data, millions of data points, spent months downloading it, analyzing it, graphing it, studying it. The results were absolutely terrifying.
Despite what you may have heard in the past, this is the compiled data from the USGS from over the last 100 years. Keep in mind that we're not talking about the millions of microtremors that can now be detected from the distribution of more numerous and sensitive sensors, but strictly data from the larger earthquakes that can be felt by people beginning at 6.3 and up on the Richter scale that could be easily detected by early 19th century sensors from virtually anywhere in the world. This data shows what the USGS and other organizations do not want you to see.
It shows that the earthquakes are increasing in intensity and they are increasing in frequency. This is exactly the description that was prophesied.
Clip from a film, The Coming Convergence. We're going to show one other clip from that at the end of this series tonight. Let's talk briefly about lawlessness. We've experienced this here in the United States in the last few years. I think a little bit more increase than we've ever seen before. Now, that's not necessarily true. Those of you who lived in the 60s That was a fairly lawless period of time, decade. But this is Germany here. This is from October 2016. And all of these articles will also be sourced that you can go back and look to. German streets descend into lawlessness. I thought it was interesting. They put it right in the title of the headline. Right? Here, complete lawlessness. Again, I'm not making up these words. This is the media reporting on what they're seeing. Okay? This is from June 2020, New York City streets. This is, let's see, ABC News. This is from May of 2021. Police declaring a riot in Portland. Maybe you've been following what's going on the West Coast. Some of our large cities here in America all experiencing this lawless behavior by people. This is from MSN. This is talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not sure why they're including Lives Matter in anything that they're doing, but you know that the protests and the stuff that's going on with Black Lives Matter. The Bible talks specifically about lawlessness. Right? But what is lawlessness? We think of lawlessness as out of control behavior, right? That's not how the Bible defines lawlessness. The Bible defines lawlessness as sin. Just sin. Sin is rebellion. Sin is lawlessness. So when we talk about the increase in lawlessness, it's just the increase in sinful behavior, right? What are we seeing with respect to church attendance and people who identify as Christians just in our country alone in the last 10 years?
Decrease.
Dramatic decrease. How about Christianity in Europe? Almost non-existent in many countries, right? You see this decline in Christianity kind of corresponding with this rise in lawlessness. 1 John 3:4, wonderful book that John wrote. It's difficult to read some of it. You guys know about this wonderful guy? Yeah.
Just before you...
Sarcastic, by the way, clearly.
Just one thing, my sister-in-law, who lives in Germany, and she attends church in Switzerland. What you don't hear is it's not reported, but the church in Swamending in Switzerland has grown from 200 to now almost 1,500.
Wonderful.
So some of the smaller churches are growing, but you won't hear that reported. They don't announce it. They don't get because there is so much there's so much prosecution, and it's difficult for them to share. But the church, just like in China, the church is growing.
Well, God's clear about these churches.
Evangelical type churches.
What does God say about the church with respect to any town, right? What does God say about His church with respect to Satan and anybody trying to tear it down?
Can't tear it down.
Can't possibly do it, right? So see, the gates of hell can't stand against it, right? That God's purposes will absolutely prevail.
And wasn't there a part in Scripture where it says that the greater the tribulation, the increase in the spread of the gospel?
I'm not sure about those exact words,
but
that sentiment, that sentiment is what occurs. So you saw it basically in the book of Acts, right? That when there was persecution, it spread the Christians out, and then the gospel was spread to where they went, right? In fact, you see it almost anytime there's persecution. You see an increase in the gospel. As people see the real gospel being played out in the lives of the Christians, right? It kind of weeds out the pseudo-Christians. Right? That's what persecution does. This guy, fairly lawless, ran an international pedophilia ring. Now he's dead, as far as we know.
Yeah.
All right. This. Just kidding. Yeah. All right. Here, U.S. government officials purchased body parts of aborted babies for science. Reveals FDA emails. I just can't imagine a holy, righteous God liking this at all. All right. And yet our federal government is involved in this. Here, Dr. Anthony Fauci. This is from June 6, 2021. This is from literally 10 days ago or so. Title of scandal involving human-animal hybrid experiments with aborted fetal parts. Look, and this is the #1 doctor from the NIH, supposedly. All right, one of our, the guy that's up there as a spokesperson. This is from townhall.com. All right, this is some recent stuff coming out that we're learning what's going on behind the scenes. All right, let's talk about something good. Bob already talked about this, right? Here we have a video magnet we're going to watch today called On the Spread of the Gospel from the last century, and just enjoy watching what God has done. Despite all of this that we see going on, we do have some wonderful news about the spread of the gospel, all right? Let's watch this together. Oh, here. This is who it's from, westernconservative.com. It's a power depiction of the most important movement in history, the spread of Christianity. So 2,000 years of the Great Commission, and we're going to watch this together. though there's other things are going on, and yes, we're talking about birth pangs, and we're talking about the things that Jesus said would happen, right? What we do see is also what Jesus said would happen with respect to the spread of the gospel, all right? We have Rex, who's one of our missionaries. We have missionaries all around the world, as do churches all around the world, right? Spending and investing people to spread the gospel and to translate God's word into every known language, all right? So you see God on the move. He will not be stopped, all right? Despite the fact that tonight we're focusing on these birth pangs, one of them is that the gospel will be spread all over the world. It's one of them. It's the best one, right? It's the absolute best one. All right, let's talk about the last one that Jesus talked about. Love gone cold. And Jesus will talk about this in terms also of just the destruction of the family and family members being against each other, kids being against their parents, etc. This is just the crime rate by country. This is 2021. You can see that we have an issue in certain places more than others. Also, if you recall this is from when I was a kid, I was in high school when this happened, right? Parents, incidents of parents, kids killing their parents. And you see this on the news more and more, issues with children and what's going on in homes. By the way, when Jesus, this actually goes back to Yahweh God back in the Old Testament, when he was talking about setting up the law to Moses and the people of Israel. He establishes this nation. He makes it very clear you don't exploit widows or orphans. This is a God who cares about the most vulnerable population. And what we're seeing in this love gone cold is this exploitation in our current culture of widows and orphans. Deuteronomy, he repeats that. He ensures that orphans and widows receive justice. He shows love to the foreigners living among you. He gives them food and clothing. This is the Jews and the Gentiles working together, right? Kind of the picture of the church, although they didn't have that concept back there in the Old Testament. This is the picture of it. God cares for everyone. He used the nation of Israel, right, to point everyone to Yahweh God, right? And he uses the church to point everyone, the world, to Jesus. Psalm 149:6, the Lord protects the foreigners among us. This theme, consistent throughout the Old Testament. He cares for the orphans and the widows, but he frustrates the plans of the wicked. We're seeing now in this baby boom generation with so many older people passing away, this large portion of the population, leaving a lot of widows. We're seeing a lot of deception of widows being taken advantage of in our culture today, in our country today. I don't know if that's global, but it's here, all right? And I didn't like this.
I think it's global, too.
It could be. This is not a good thing. Don't be messing with widows and orphans. Don't be doing it, all right? Here's a video to watch here. This is from Africa. Let's go back. I think this is our last video.
Children are being forced to kill each other, to burn people alive, and abduct other kids to fight other people's wars. It's nothing new. This is the reality for many kids who are alone, orphaned, and frightened. They either choose to or are abducted and forced to fight for an armed group. For centuries, this has been the case for countless kids, and it's still happening today. Joining an armed group has been the only way for many kids to have protection or simply survive. More than 357 million children live in war and conflict zones today, and tens of thousands of children are being used as soldiers. They become fighters, suicide bombers, human shields, messengers, spies, and they are even used for sex. They experience violence to the core, either as witnesses, victims, or active players. A lot of these kids don't make it out alive, and many who do have severe physical and emotional injuries and end up living with disabilities for the rest of their lives. Despite it being an international war crime, 56 non-state armed groups and 7 state armed forces in 14 countries use children as soldiers. It's happening in Colombia, Yemen, Somalia, South Sudan and Iraq, and most recently in the Syrian war. Terror groups like Daesh, also known as ISIS, and the YPG have been using kids to fight and sending them to their deaths. But there is some help coming from aid organisations like UNICEF and Amnesty International. They've managed to save a number of children from the conflicts in countries like Myanmar, Afghanistan, Chad and Sri Lanka, and help them to reintegrate into society. What type of future these kids will have, and if they'll ever have a normal life like other kids, is still up in the air.
I just want peace in my life.
I just want peace in my life. Kids, orphans being used as pawns in war. It's just evil. South Sudan, this is from 2015, just horrific stuff going on over there. Birth pangs, right? That's a topic tonight. What did Jesus say would happen the closer it got to him coming back, right? That all of these things would happen. Now, we've seen all of these things. Those of you who've been in here longer than others, you've seen some of this stuff your whole life. So what's the difference, Darren? Why, that's nice. It's a nice little study tonight. You've shown us a lot of negative things. That's because it's all news articles. The news doesn't show anything good. Right, we saw one good part for tonight. What's the point? All right? What's the point? Here's the point. Convergence. Here's what we see. All right? We are now seeing all of these things happening at the same time. And what did Jesus say to watch for? Not that these things would happen. He said these things would always happen. But the closer it gets to his return, we would see all of these things happening in frequency and intensity. All right? This is the last video, sorry.
But today, even with the remaining 500 prophecies appearing to converge before our very eyes, most people are ignoring the warnings.
Sometimes I look at my TV and I want to yell back at the commentator or the person that's on the TV trying to get his attention about his analysis of the world. But then I realize the media is just as blind as the culture that they're leading. If there's ever the statement, the blind leading the blind, it is a media-driven world that's blind, and the world that follows them is blind. And what do I mean by that? I don't want to sound mean, but there's a path that the world is taking that the Bible says there's a way that seems right to a man, but that way ends in death. And then there's a path and a direction that God has set. I do see the world blindly being led by the blind. They have an agenda. According to their worldview, it serves a purpose. And for those who are permeated with that, look, you can't compete with it. It's beautiful. It's got the right lighting. It's got the right sound. It's got the right hype. They honestly believe that what they have to offer is the answer. And that is, we can do this as humans. We can come together as one. We can create our own utopia, which is no new idea. We can cause our own republic to take place as a one-world, man-centric governing empire. And if we just pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, we can do this. And yet it's a modern-day dress-up of an ancient idea. And every one of those ideas have failed. It will always fail.
Even today, it would be difficult for one to accurately predict the state of the world in just a few years from now, never mind several millennia into the future. And yet, beyond all odds, we are on the path to complete prophetic fulfillment as it was foretold within the biblical prophetic timeline over thousands of years ago.
Like the disciples 2,000 years ago, we want to know, what are the signs of the end of the age? What are the signs of Jesus' return? And Jesus replied with a number of signs to watch for, including false prophets, wars, earthquakes. But the most important thing he said that a lot of people miss is he said, when you see all these things happen, then look up, for your redemption draws nigh. And the real key to that passage is all these things. So when people ask, what is the number one sign we should be looking for to indicate the end of the age? It's convergence. Convergence of the signs that Jesus talked about. It's not just one sign or two signs, it's all of them. And as we look at the world around us, we are seeing the signs that Jesus talked about coming together in increasing frequency and increasing intensity. That is what makes our generation unique.
Throughout history, there have always been regional wars, famines, and disasters. However, the convergence of prophetic events in the last generation make it clear that all of these things would not only be global in nature, but occur simultaneously, beginning after the rebirth of Israel, a scenario that has never existed before in the history of the world.
things have snowballed in such a way that, frankly, I never thought I would see it this way. Global economic peril, global border issues, global lawlessness, global threat of terrorism. The things that the Bible has warned about is coming to pass at the exact same time across the board. We are living in the time of the signs. It's quite amazing.
We've never been at a time like this ever before. But what's exciting about where we are right now is this is the first generation in 2,000 years where you have a modern state of Israel that's been reborn. All of this is converging right now before our eyes.
None of the Bible prophecies regarding the second coming of Christ really had a whole lot of validity in the sense of they could be happening anytime until Israel became a nation again. And we see the convergence of all the other things, earthquakes, pestilence, famine, the convergence of all these things happening at the same time, and the world turning against Israel all at the same time, which is also very prophetic. All of these things are happening at the exact same time at a feverish pitch. I find that the most fascinating thing.
Jesus gave every reason to believe.
They go on. We mentioned this earlier. How does the world explain, or do their best to explain what they're seeing? All of these things happening at the same time.
Climate change.
1975. How far back is this? Not too far back. How many years? All right. Just a few years back, right? A couple decades. Global warming, right? But they moved on from global warming, have they not? Right? They now call it climate change. This came out of the Charney Report, 1979. I was a little kid when this came out. Right? I don't remember it coming out, but I sure hear the term now. Right? Carbon dioxide. Their explanations for their attempted explanations for what they're seeing. Right? Ultimately, they're trying to blame who for the climate issues? In their pride, they're trying to blame that humankind, like as if we can do anything to affect our climate, right? Their definition for global warming, we can move on past this. It really became a popular term in 1988, but all of this stuff has been just in the last 50 years as they try to explain what they're seeing happening around our globe. Yeah.
You know, that it goes back further than 50 years, but I mean, there's an article that if you read the article, they were talking about you see ground where there was snow and the polar bears don't know what to do and all these things that are, and they read like it came out yesterday, and you read the bottom of the article and it was an article from like 1938. I mean, they've been screaming this stuff ever. And the interesting thing about what they do is they always kick the can down the road about 1 or 2 elections. And you see that is that I'm going to tell you what's going on, and I'm going to kick the can down far enough to scare you now to get your money, and then I'll reevaluate later on when you've forgotten what I've said now, and I'll say something new then, and it's going to start the thing all over.
Well, if you recall, there was it was vice presidential. It was actually one of our vice presidents who came out and made a movie, right? Inconvenient Truth, and made all kinds of predictions. We talked about true prophets versus false prophets in our introduction to our prophecy class. How many predictions have to be wrong to make you a false prophet? One. All right, they're a false prophet. Should we listen to them? No.
Well, if you like a good chuckle, but no.
Here's where we are today in 2021. I don't know how long this video will be up, but in 2021, here's where we are. This is coming out of The Guardian, which is a UK newspaper. There are 4 types of climate denier and why you should ignore them all. All right. So if you don't bend to the popular will that there is climate change, you're a climate denier, and then he's 4 different. He goes on in the article. He gives you 4 different types of climate. You can go on there and figure out which guy you are. Are you the shill, the grifter, the egomaniac, or the ideological fool? How about this? Should climate change deniers be prosecuted?
What?
Should they? What do you think about that?
What is that dramatic?
By the way,
they got their head in the sand? That's
yeah, this is a protest. They were protesting climate deniers by putting their heads in the sand. To me, all I see is a bunch of rear ends. But that's I mean, I guess it depends on your perspective on this protest. All right? Wow. Governments and firms in 28 countries have been sued over the climate crisis. Follow the money, right? Follow the money.
Because
right.
again, it goes from silver to the petrodollar, and I will almost guarantee you that it's going to be some form of carbon credit coming up.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what comes of it. But yes, Bob.
I was just going to share, we were in Switzerland a couple of years ago, and we were up in the Alps, and glaciers up there, what they have done, they literally have thousands of meters of tarps covering some of these glaciers because it's actually receding. The problem is, other glaciers in other parts of the Alps are actually growing. So we had this discussion with my sister-in-law. I said the media is just tearing itself apart because you have one fraction that said, well, how come these are growing and how come this one is receding? So if they went back in history, they find it's such a long time. It's hard to determine it, but they're at odds ends of explaining this phenomena.
Well, the world has to do its best to describe what it observes, and they're not going to use biblical terms.
Yeah.
They're not going to use terms that Jesus used. When the rapture occurs, depending on how your belief about that, we're going to teach what the church again teaches on that. They will have to have some explanation.
Alien abduction, absolutely.
And they will have their explanation for it, right? It's not going to be a biblical explanation, which is why, again, I found it so ironic that they use, that this flood is a biblical proportion. They only use it when they want to use it for their purposes. This is Jesus later on in Matthew 24. This is our last slide for the evening. Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. Who is Jesus talking to? He's talking to his friends. He's talking to his disciples, to the Christians, the early church. He says, learn a lesson, guys. Pay attention. So Jesus tells his students to pay attention. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, what do you know? The summer is near. Agricultural imagery, right? In the same way, when you see all these things happening together at the same time, you see the convergence, you can know his return is very near. Jesus' return, my return, right at the very door. So while we do look at this, and it does seem to be a little negative in our study, it's not. Because as Christians, we look at this and we celebrate. We don't celebrate the negative things that are happening. And everyone, Christians and non-Christians, are affected by this. And we don't celebrate that non-Christians are affected by this. We want them to know Christ, right? We don't want them to suffer like we would want our own families to suffer. What it should do is motivate us to share the gospel, because we know Jesus' return is near, right at the very door. Now, we're not predicting anything in our series. That's not our intention. But we can predict the times, right? And we can predict that it's close.